This position is from the game between Paul and Pancevski. Here we have the opposite color bishops on the board, but also we have queens and rooks. Now, we know that opposite color bishops endgames are in general drawish endgames, even though there are some positions which can be won. Usually it's said that if you want to make a draw, you go into opposite color bishop endgames. But here with the rooks and queens, the things change. The battle now becomes very sharp. Why? Because the attacking side usually has big advantage because it's attacking with one extra piece. Or actually, it's white here will be using the light squares to attack black king, which black won't be able to control with his dark squared bishop. So that is why the opposite color bishop endgames, where there are rooks and queens on the board, or rooks only with bishops or queens only with bishops, favor the side that is attacking, the side that has safer king, because very dangerous attacks can be done with bishop and rook or bishop and queen, mating attacks towards the opponent's king. Here it's white to move, so I would suggest you to pause this video and try to find an interesting idea for him. How would you continue? Okay, so here we have rook d3 was played by white. The idea of this move is to transfer the rook to f3, from where he will be able to put pressure on the f7 pawn, and in the same time defending the f2 pawn and defending the white king. This is a very interesting idea, very interesting move, because here actually white is emphasizing the activity of his rook versus the passivity of the black's rook on f8. And this will be the slight advantage that white has in this endgame throughout this finish our last 20 moves. His rook on d3 or on f3 will be much more active than the rook on f8. The game continued bishop c5 and rook f3. Black played queen d4. Better was to play queen e7, and after queen takes e7, bishop takes e7, bishop c4. Black can play g6 with the idea to unpin his king, unpin his pawn on f7, move the king to g7, which will lead to probably a drawish endgame. If white didn't exchange queens, he could have played something like queen c4 if he wants to put more pressure, if he wants to play for a win. Maybe queen c4 would have been more interesting for him to keep more pieces on the board in hopes to exploit the pressure on the f7 pawn. Here we can see that white doesn't have a big advantage. It's just he has an unpleasant pressure towards the black position, especially the pawn on f7. So queen d4, bishop c4. Now white is threatening rook f7, and after rook f7, queen e8 check. So that's why black has to retreat with his queen on d7 and queen e4. a5. Such moves are very useful in bishop endgame, opposite color bishop endgames, because black is putting his pawns on dark squares, and all those pawns are defending each other. The pawn on a5 is protected by the pawn on b6, while the pawn on b6 is protecting the bishop on c5, and the c5 bishop protects the pawn on b6. So it's kind of a fortress there, and that is quite difficult for white to later on exploit to attack some of the black pawns. If, for example, pawn remained on a7, it's unprotected. So in the future, maybe white can play something like bishop a6. We saw in our previous example with the idea bishop h6, where the h7 pawn was vulnerable. Here, that might happen in some future with the pawn on a7. But okay, that's far away. Just it looks better when the pawn is on a5, because it looks like very fortress-like. Rook d3 and queen e7. Now, if black doesn't play queen e7, if he plays something else, queen c7 for example, It is possible, but then white will try to play bishop b5 and rook d7 maybe, or queen f5, with the idea rook d7 or queen d7. So that is why black immediately went for queen e7 in order to exchange the queens, but we will see that this won't make his task much more easier. Queen takes e7, bishop e7, and now we reach a position with opposite colored bishops with rooks on board. It seems like it should be draw. It's equal, correct, but it's a very unpleasant position to play as black. Rook d7 and bishop c5. King g2. White will slowly now try to improve the position of his king, of his all pieces practically. He has a very strong rook on d7, very strong bishop on c4, well coordinated, while black has a bishop on c5 that is quite good, but alone bishop cannot do anything, and a very bad or passive rook on f8. Still, because there is no extra material for white, there is no passed pawn, this position is considered by the computers to be equal. However, it's not easy for black to play as a human. g6 and white plays g4. He wants to gain more space on the king side. He wants to create pressure on the black king. h6 and now h4. g5. Otherwise, white will play g5. H takes g5, h takes g5, and king g3. King g7, normal moves. Black practically doesn't have any other choice. He is forced to keep the rook on f8, the bishop on c5, you cannot place it on a better square. So what black can do is only push his king forward, try to get activity with his own king. f4, and black played bishop e3. He could have taken on f4, f takes g5, bishop g5, and white plays king f3. The idea is to play king e4 and king e4 and king f5. The king is one of the strongest, or the strongest piece in the endgame, so whenever we have a chance and it's not in danger, we can or we should activate the king and put it on the most useful square. In some of our endgame positions where there are many pieces on the board, where they are dangerous for mating attack, then the king should be hidden away somewhere in the corner of the board. In this type of endgames, when there is no imminent danger towards our king, then the king should be active. Bishop d8 and king f4. King g6. Bishop d3. Check, king goes to g7 and king f5. Black played king h6. Better was for him here to play a rook e8 and to try to activate his rook, to activate his pieces after bishop c4, attacking the pawn on f7, not allowing black to consolidate his defense. There is a possibility for bishop e7, and after rook b7, king f8. Rook takes b6 and bishop b4. Now again the computer gives this position as equal, and yes, we can say that black manages to activate his pieces. As we can see, he did that as a cost of a pawn, for a cost of a pawn. We can see here that the rook on e8 is far more active now than on f8, which is a big plus for black. We can see that white cannot easily make a or take a benefit from this extra pawn on the queen side. More importantly is that now white doesn't have a lot of pawns, so with few pawns on the board, the fewer they are, the easier it is for the defensive side to save the game. That is why this was the best choice for black, but it's not easy to just give up a pawn for nothing. As for computers, this is an easy choice, but for a human it can be tricky to give such material for nothing. If we go back, king h6, bishop c4, and king g7. Now this is already a decisive mistake for black. If instead he should have played rook e8, giving up the pawn, and after bishop f7, rook f8. Now, as in many positions, it's very important to prioritize activity over material. When you have chance to sacrifice material, to give some material in order to activate the pieces, you should take it, because very often you can keep the material, but with passive pieces eventually your opponent will force you to give the material. So here, by giving up the f7 pawn, now black has nothing to protect, and his rook on f8 actually is quite active. Now he's putting pressure on the bishop on f7. For example, after king f4, bishop g5, king e4, white has won a pawn, but still black has good defensive resources, and he can keep fighting practically. White has to work very hard in order to win this, if possible, to win this endgame. In the game, after king h6, bishop c4, king g7, white played g5. Now we can see that black is in big trouble because of the white pawn also came into play. Practically white is now threatening g6, which is not easy for black to defend against. He played king g8, and after g6 he resigned, because white can take now on f7 with his pawn, tying up the black rook on f8 permanently, and we can see that all black pieces after that will be paralyzed. So it was crucial here, the pawn push from g4 to g6, which paralyzed the black position. If black here played something like king h8, then bishop f7 and g6 would be good for white, and eventually black will have to resign practically, because even mating threats are possible there in that position. So this was an excellent example that in opposite color bishop endgames there is a big difference whether you have rooks or you don't, or you have queens or you don't. The character of the battle changes, and even though there are not enough pieces to be called a middle game, still a rook and bishop can create mating threats towards the opponent's king. I have personally, from a personal experience, created multiple mating threats with rook, bishop, and pawn together with the king. So the character of the position really much changes from being a totally drawish to being a very sharp position. And that's why we need to keep our king safe. Practically all the pawns around the king, our king, need to be on different color than our bishop is, which means the same color as the opponent's bishop is, so that they can protect our king from eventual attacks. Our bishop controls, let's say, here if we are white, our bishop controls the light squares, the pawns control the dark squares, so that our opponent will have difficult time attacking us.